Okay, 5 o'clock, I'll call the meeting to order of the City of Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation. And I'll lead the invocation this morning if you'll bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for a very beautiful day. Thank you that we get to live in a great community that has lots of great people committed to its success. We just pray for wisdom in all that we do. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, do we have anybody signed up for Citizens Forum? Okay. We've got 2 matters on the agenda to approve minutes from prior meetings, one on October the 18th, 2021, and one on October 25th, 2021. Those were included in your packets. I'll entertain a motion to approve those unless anybody has any amendments they want to suggest.
I move for approval.
Oh, I'll second it then.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, that's approved unanimously. Next item on our agenda is KEDC update.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. Okay, so today I'm going to get away a little bit from the traditional economic reports that we've done in the past. And I'll talk a little bit about or focus on 3 main topics. That's going to be the workforce white paper that we recently drafted, the housing opportunity as it pertains to industry demand, and then the Business and Innovation Forum and how that has actually led to some very strategic and important partnerships here in the last couple of weeks. And ultimately how it's all about connecting the dots and what have you. So starting with workforce, we've researched and written up the first draft of the white paper. I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting. And we'll make this paper available at the next board meeting. If there's no board meeting in December, then we'll make sure that you have it in December as well. We just need to make sure that the KDC gets the approval of the white paper. Some of the main points that have been made in this paper include the city and county population, again, is trending upward, but our civilian workforce population is trending downward. So in economic development, this is what's labeled as a wake-up call for us economic developers as far as looking at the makeup of the community and again, being conscious of the fact that we can start losing our economic resiliency if we don't do something about this. We provide a brief history as far as how we got into this situation in the first place, providing some very, very preliminary solutions and really more of a quick Band-Aid. And that's the obvious one, it's just more rooftops to have more critical mass here in the area. But also in working with EA, his team, other stakeholder groups, other entities, looking at some creative solutions for existing livable space. Great announcement in the paper earlier this week as far as the Lennar Homes. That again is on track with addressing this situation, and also continuing the promotion of this area of being a vibrant but family-oriented place for people to live in. And I think I've said this before. I mean, Kerrville is a very desirable place to live in, so we've got the upper hand in that regard. There's also a question about incentives in the paper. It doesn't get answered. It's just it poses that question as far as is incentives part of the equation, and what are other EDOs, other communities doing to address this? It also poses a question of the private sector. Does a private sector have to have skin in the game in order to address it as well? In turn, the papers provided us at the KDC the research and the data to come up with the necessary strategies to start working on this. And one thing that I've said in the past, as a matter of fact, when I interviewed for the position, can't believe this, 3 years ago, is every major decision that an economic development organization makes has to be based on research and data. And that's precisely what we're doing here with this particular paper. As far as some of the strategies, again, is just looking at stopping the bleeding from the workforce, reversing that trend. And something that's pretty interesting, in the last year, millennials have become the largest workforce group or generation that's working in our country, which has surpassed my generation, the Gen X. So that's now, we're starting to focus on that particular group. And at the rate that we're going, I will say, and this will mean the paper as well, that, we could potentially see the flight of capital and the flight of good paying jobs if we don't get on top of this fairly soon. I will say, and this is part of what we'll be discussing in the next few months, we have lost out on 2, maybe 3 projects because of our workforce issues. I'll leave it at that. I think we'll be discussing that further, especially when we get into our stakeholder retreat. We're also going to start a series of editorials, get them in some of our local media outlets, define what economic development is, again, revisit that. I mean, we're about 3-4 years into the 2050 comprehensive plan, into our roadmap as well, looking at defining economic development, what it actually means for Kerrville today, our workforce situation, and then housing market nationally as well as locally. Also, as a result of the data, we're now hosting a industry roundtable discussion in January, specifically addressing this issue, and we're developing some working committees with our local ISDs. We've got 4 or 5 ISDs that are now really coming to the table to look at our workforce pipeline and bridging the gap between industry and education. Moving on to housing and an extension and or building on the white paper findings. We've started a partnership with Schreiner University and with industry. Again, looking at innovative housing solutions with the university. And we're hopeful we can make an announcement here in the next couple of months. And again, it's a possibility of maybe looking at some of their space, converting that and making that available for some industry. And this would be, a temporary, kind of like that Band-Aid that we talked about. And this would be for, I'm not going to say certain employers, but those that are most in need. Again, that industry roundtable that we're going to have in January is to start talking about, okay, who's got the biggest need, looking at some of those jobs, and looking at some space that might be available, some creative space, if I may add that. This will, and I will say that, the KDC board has really been behind this, and Maggie has been a huge driver in making this relationship or this partnership happen, and looking at thinking outside the box. And hopefully this coincides with the visit of the Texas Workforce Commissioner, who will be coming in for that industry roundtable at the end of January. So again, we're trying to kind of time it as such. Along the lines of partnerships with Schreiner, we're also looking, or hopeful, to maybe have some kind of an announcement soon. We've collaborated with them in applying for some Economic Development Administration funds, specifically the STEMS Challenge. And that would go, that would be for the Curran Entrepreneur Center, allowing us to really now look at an actual bricks and mortar facility, hiring some staff, fully developing the programs that we want to develop. So, it's just a wait and see right now for the EDA, and because it is a federal government, it takes them several months to come back and tell us whether, we're good to go with that or not. Again, very preliminary, and this is very in line or aligned with upskilling our local talent and working on filling up our talent pipeline. And for the Courage, it's a great next step for the Courage Entrepreneurial Center. Now, looking at the forum.
Hey, Gil, before
Yes.
you move on to that, in your research, has there been any considerable movement in housing availability over the last couple of years? Have houses become more available? Has the problem gotten better or worse?
Worse, and that's nationally. Kerrville was almost kind of like a predictor of what was going to happen nationally. I mean, when I got here, I thought it was bad. No, that was not bad. I could still find something. It's gotten worse, and that's because Kerrville is Kerrville. People want to be here. California, I shouldn't even say California, it's people from the West Coast. California, Colorado, Oregon, state of Washington, wanting to be in this area. That's one. The other one is because of what we're seeing, we're somewhat of early adopters in implementing some programs. And this will go back to that workforce or that housing group that was created by the council when I first got here. And, that announcement of, Lennar Homes, that was a result of that, being proactive and trying to get somebody in here. What I like about that is that that is starting to attract other developers because we're getting the calls. So it's almost like yes and no. Yes, it's worse, but no in the sense that we're early adopters. We saw that early on, but we still have a long ways to go.
So if I could just add to that, I mean, it's better in some ways, right? So we had almost 400 units of multifamily housing come on stock in the last 24 months. That's great, and that's an improvement. Unfortunately, where we're at now is we've got both of those facilities have over 2-year waiting lists, right? And there's no other multifamily units that are in construction. So certainly there's a high degree of need in that area. We're 99% occupied in multifamily. We've had 2 banner years on building. 2 years ago, you couldn't have told me that. During the middle of a pandemic and a recession, we'd have record-setting building permits requested for residential building. But that's what occurred. Has it fit the need, though? Absolutely not, right? Because demand has outstripped supply, and we were in a bad housing situation going in to the market. So, it's better. It's not better, but it's not necessarily tremendously worse. What we don't have is some near-term relief necessarily in the next 24 to 48 months.
And adding another layer to that complicates things, and again, it's not just locally, it's nationally, is because of supply and demand, rents are going up significantly, and we're seeing that here as well. So that again just adds another layer of complexity to the whole situation that we're in. Okay, moving on to the forum. Thanks for everybody who participated and provided some support for that forum. We had a great lineup of speakers, panelists, experts. I will say it didn't seem like it was a huge crowd at times. The Arcadia Theater is a lot bigger than I originally thought. But we had 168 people that actually participated, and that was a combination of in-person and via Zoom. And then we had concurrent sessions. We actually drew away from some of the main discussions that we're having. So it was 168 that actually participated. Another 105 was for the last day of the 3-day conference / events, which was the Top 40 program. We have a long list of takeaways, which we'll make available, later, either next month or during our end of year reports in January. And just briefly, the aerospace panel, aviation and aerospace was the top rated discussion. And as a result of that one, an avionics college had some donated tools and equipment from some of the companies that were in attendance. Internships were offered to students on the spot. We had about 60 students that came in from Ingram ISD. We had from Schreiner as well. Ourselves, the KDC, we started a collaboration with the Association of Mexican Entrepreneurs, and that was at the suggestion of the San Antonio Economic Foundation. It's like you only start working with them, especially if you have an entrepreneur center. And then we've identified about a dozen entrepreneurs and incubator candidates as well, which was one of the goals that we had. It's like, once we have people coming in, we should be able to identify some candidates. There was an announcement of a HBO film production that's coming into town. So that was announced at the actual, at one of the sessions. Killdeer, some of their new executives were there at the event, and they interviewed some job candidates. So they had some interviews there. And then we also hosted a site selector. He toured the city, provided some feedback, and basically said, hey, there's some great opportunities here for you all. So with that, I just have 3 slides, 3 quick quotes. I'm glad I brought a printout. It's hard for me to read that. Okay, so this is Mindy Curran, Ingram ISD Superintendent. She said, providing our students a more global perspective and piquing their interest in future careers is important in helping to fulfill the needs of our young talent and the economic growth of Curran County. They were fantastic as far as their participation there. Bill Fisher, he's the dean at the Hallmark University out of San Antonio and is looking to enter the Kerrville market as far as actually setting up here. Great opportunity to meet other aviation community leaders, and we even had a company donate tools and equipment to our school for our students. And obviously the donation there is kind of like whatever students you have graduating that want to work at our facility, send them our way. And that's from our companies here locally. And then the other one's Don Sheldall, the national site selector that came in. He's based out of the Northeast. And he can say, look, I can honestly say the program was uniquely creative and inspiring. I would have never expected such efforts from people outside of urban centers outside of Texas. Of course, he's not from Texas, right? He's got a new respect for Kerrville, in addition to really not knowing where Kerrville was at. And I remember that, so I had to kind of like tell him where we're at. But again, just introducing our community to some of these individuals who have the key to major projects throughout the U.S. Okay, so now wrapping up as far as our schedule. Again, our industry roundtable, we've pushed it back from December to January. And that's for our top 15 employers. We've got the Texas Workforce Commissioner coming in for that to discuss workforce initiatives, programs that they have, and really just the status of workforce at the state and what we can gather, at the local level, or the local impact and what to expect in the next year, 2 years. The Courage Entrepreneurial Center, we've got our next mastermind series that's launching in January, filling up those slots. And then our end of year stakeholder reports, the KEDC usually does, it's in December when we do our end of year reports to all of our stakeholders with our key performance measurements and deliverables. We're going to push it to January because of my mobility issue. And then we are getting a prospect visit in January as well. That's Project Oak 600, which is a project I think I mentioned at the last meeting. It's an injection molding operation looking at 3 cities in the Hill Country. About a 50-person operation, good paying jobs. And then we have a pending community event with Killdeer. Not too sure when that exactly is going to happen, but we're looking at January, February as well. So in closing, it's just, as I mentioned earlier, it's about us connecting the dots with workforce, housing, local industry, Shriner. The ISDs are now coming to meet with us, which really hadn't happened before. I'm not saying it's on them, but it's now we really have very good dialogue with them. And then Courage is now front and center in a lot of these discussions, and state partnerships, looking at leveraging those relationships, and hopefully there's something coming out of the EDA as well. That concludes my report.
Are there any primary employers that are looking at expansions right now?
Local employers, outside of the medical sector, I don't have any that are saying that we're getting ready to expand. All plastics has been.
Their business is good. Most of them are businesses very good, obviously, from the sales tax side.
Yeah.
So
Business is very good for the majority of
indicates that
primary
they're
employers.
trying to expand as well, labor force issues and so
Yep.
forth. But no construction expansions that you're aware of.
Not big ones, not major ones. I know, I have to be careful. There was one that was in the works, and we're all very familiar with this company. But they had to push the button, or the pause button, one because of COVID, and then another one because of external variables they couldn't control. Now we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you, Gil.
All right. Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation project status update. And EA has provided an updated monthly EIC project status report. You might have any comments or questions on that?
No.
No? All right, then we'll move on to item 5C, our monthly financials.
Good afternoon. I have my presentation today. Before we do the October financials, we just want to give you a little view of what your fiscal year 2021 ended at. And this is just basically a layout of your income statement. So you had revenues, and that's your sales tax and interest income at $4,462,000. You had expenditures in the administrative category totaling $382,500. Debt service $2,107,000. And your projects paid out throughout the year was $1,532,000. So you have a net income for fiscal year 2021 at $439,000.
What's the percent above the goal, the revenue?
On the revenues,
See it go by what, 12% or?
I have that on my last month, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact percentage, but it was trending higher for every month last year.
Sure.
Okay, so for your, I can get you that specific percentage though.
It'll come up.
So looking at October 31st, 2021. On your first slide here is your statement of activities, and we're looking at your annual budget in the current period to kick off the new year. So for your annual budget on your sales tax, we have $4,223,000, and for the month of October, EIC sales tax came in at $365,850. This is a 17% increase over October 2020 actuals, and still remains the larger payers. They fall into the categories of number 1 being retail, 2 manufacturing, 3 is construction, 4 food service, and 5 is wholesale. Manufacturing and retail did have some payers with significant increases and compared to prior year, so that's what's driving this incline for this particular month. And with that October's receipts, EIC dipped into the budget at 8.7% of the sales tax. November sales tax hit today, $419,000. Our preliminary calculations show that to be about 11% increase, and but there is about $120,000 of future period payments came in. So we don't have the detailed report yet, but once we dissect that, we can give you a true picture next month. On your interest income, down below that sales tax, we do have a budget set at $9,600, and in October we saw $144 earned. Moving down to your expenditures, in expenses and operations, we have $518,000 for the year, and in debt payments, you'll have $1,089,000 for the year budgeted. So this month, we paid out $16,250 to the city for administrative fees. Your first quarterly payment to KDC went out for $78,000, and then you have a monthly debt transfer of $90,000. Yes. So down to your project section. So on the books for this year, starting off, we have the ongoing airport projects and then Arcadia Life. No payments were made to either of those projects this month, so we look to see activity throughout the year. So that leaves EIC with the net position of a positive $180,000 for the month.
I thought Arcadia Live was split between 2 years. Is that correct?
Split between 2 calendar years,
2 calendar years.
same fiscal year. So one
physical-
payment to occur before the end of this calendar year.
For one.
And then an additional at
be
some
next
point
year.
next calendar year, but possibly before the end of the fiscal year, depending on their grant match.
Oh, I thought we were.
It could roll over into the following.
We gave them
Following.
till December
It could.
It
31st.
very well
Just
could.
whenever
Yeah.
they-
Just depends on when
We
they
just tried to,
release it, right?
this went through the end of the
I
fiscal
thought we
year.
booked it for the 22.
No, sir.
That's fine.
On to your cash flow. This, is that the slide you're on? I can't see up there. Is that cash flow? Okay. Your October activities here in this first column, and that's with everything that came in and went out. You have a net ending cash balance of $2,920,000. And your columns to the far right are your fiscal year 22 projections. And we have those kind of just divided out by quarter for the moment, but as trends go and the year keeps progressing, we will update those to give you a true cash availability. That way, if a project comes up along the way, we'll know when we can plan that or start it. Okay, and on to your last slide, your financial analysis. Your chart 1 just reflects your project committed balances, and we just have those 2 there. Your middle chart is your sales tax revenue analysis, and this gives you the same comparisons by dollar and percentage from last year, your budget this year, and what has actually come in. And we just want to note that we do realize this sales tax budget is very conservative, so we highly anticipate we'll come back with a mid-year budget amendment just so that we can get everything in line. And then your last chart at the bottom there is your taxable balance, and that's where all your cash is kept at 0.06% interest.
Just a question on the tax pool.
Yes,
And
sir.
I know it's the safest, most conservative place we can store our money. It's my understanding, I think K-Pub has done some different things with some of their funds. as far as CDs with, I know one of the local banks. Have we looked into that, or is that a consideration?
There are CDs we can get into. With CDs, you know, you only can go a max for insurance purposes, and 250,000 is the max on the FDIC side, and you know, that's going to grow at a small rate also, but just depends. 25, 30 basis points you may be able to get into. I may have to reach out to KPUB and see what they're doing, just to get some ideas.
What is it, I mean, I know it's a small amount, it just,
I think it'd be worth looking at.
Yeah.
we
There
talked to.
are also insured deposit programs where you can go above that. So
The
Yeah.
collateralization and stuff.
different ways. And
Yeah.
I would say 25 to 30 basis points is pretty conservative. You might get a little more than that even.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of those pieces too, we've tried, you know, cash flow has been of the utmost paramount, particularly with this group, because you may say next month you want all 5 million to go out the door, right?
Yeah,
And so
I
you can't be
understand.
tied up with a 24-month or 48-month bond, or CD, so.
It's not a high priority, but within the next 2 or 3 meetings, maybe, if we
Yes,
could
sir.
just have some, if there's some options.
options out there.
Greg, maybe you can tell us right up front, I don't know, but I'd just like to see that.
Okay. Definitely. Any other questions?
Good report.
Thank you. Happy holidays to everyone.
All right, we move on to consideration and possible action for EIC application for funding for Peterson Health expansion.
Just provide a brief introduction. We received, had been approached by Peterson Health a number of months ago and helped them through the application process, which has been included in your packet. As you may or may not have heard from announcements, community announcements several months ago, they are progressing and expanding their campus and providing a surgery center, breaking off from one of their existing facilities. And as you recall, Peterson is one of our largest employers and is really considered a primary employer in importing medical services and the medical needs of really our entire region. So they absolutely are looking at growing our primary employment base. And with that, we've got several representatives from Peterson Health that would like to further present their application to you today.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, EIC board members, city manager, city staff. Thank you so much for the opportunity today to allow you to share a little bit about what we have going on at Peterson Health. My name is Joe Puser. I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations and started back in Peterson back in 2005. Currently, we are in the process working with some architects and just entered the design development phase of the project for the new Amanda and J. David Williams Surgery Center. And so Peterson Health, I think everybody knows who Peterson Health is, but a little bit more about really who are we. So it's kind of neat to think about 72 years ago, July 1949, where we are sitting here today, is the initial founding vision of Hal and Charlie Peterson, the gift of Sid Peterson Memorial Hospital to Kerrville and its residents. And so when you look at our mission to provide exceptional, compassionate, patient-centered care, that really ties back in line with what their vision was. We want people to experience exceptional health care here in Kerrville and not have to go to San Antonio to do that. Our vision is to provide world-class care today, tomorrow, and always. Our values, caring, accountability, leadership, learning, integrity, nurturing, and going the extra mile, and our core competency of elevating health. So as EA mentioned, we are one of the largest employers in Kerr County. According to the EDC website, about 1,200 employees. And so what you will see is a little bit different from what's on our application. And it all depends on how you break down or how you define what an employee is. We at Peterson utilize what's called full-time equivalents. And so we basically say, okay, if a full-time employee would work 40 hours in a week. So if we have somebody who is working, let's say, to cover an extra shift or two, they may be considered more than one FTE because they're working more than just one, what we would consider one FTE equivalent, which would be 40 hours a week or 80 hours a pay period. What also is not included are our contract folks. So for example, our pharmacy is a contracted pharmacy. Those are roughly 30 employees in that department that, although are not employed directly by Peterson, live within the community, although, again, they're just not directly employed by Peterson. And this also doesn't take into consideration the roughly 70, 75 full-time open positions that we currently have at Peterson. Yes. Employees obviously very important, but we are on the grow, and not growing just here in Kerrville, but also growing regionally. So we have a presence in Dura, we have a presence in Comfort, and some of you may have heard in January we'll be opening a clinic, primary care clinic in Fredericksburg. So you may be thinking, well, how does that really help Kerrville or Kerr County? Those primary care providers will end up referring to proceduralists here in Kerrville. And so we will have people regionally coming to Kerrville for their procedures and not necessarily going to Bernie or to San Antonio, but coming back to Kerrville for their care. So we also conducted a facilities master plan, and this was completed in early 2020, and I'll share a little bit about that here. And so they looked at to say, okay, really over the next 10 years, so by 2030, what do we anticipate as far as growth? What do we, as Peterson, and what is Kerrville as a community going to need as far as infrastructure to be able to provide the health care that our community needs and desires? So from a surgical perspective, they basically did some analysis and said, look, you're going to need 4 outpatient ORs. As far as GI and endoscopy, going to need, based on growth, mid-projection would be roughly 3. If you see high growth, you would need 4 endoscopy suites. And then really one of the biggest things is some additional office space for physicians that we're recruiting. So we've got roughly 21 new recruits that we're looking to try and fill for Kerr and surrounding areas, and then also 32 replacement opportunities as well for physicians. This is just a little bit of a floor plan of what that surgery center will look like. It's really not intended for you to be able to really dissect and read that. Does this have a laser pointer on it or no?
It might show up on there.
Okay. I don't think so. Anyway, so based on the left-hand side of that, you'll see the 4 ORs. On the bottom in the light green are the endo suites. In the blue, lighter blue area, kind of the center to the left of the purple, is what we call our support area. So our sterile processing, sterile supply, things like that. In the purple area is our pre and post procedure. So somebody comes in for a procedure, they'll have pre and then post. And then the entrance will be top far right corner where you see in the orange. And then to the left of that, we'll have some administrative spaces, break room. And then the top left corner is mechanical space in the gray. And so as far as where it will sit on the campus, so when you're coming up Wesley Drive heading towards the hospital, there's currently a parking lot on the right-hand side. And that parking lot will need to be demolished, if you will, and that will be the location for the new surgery center. This square footage depicts about 40,000. That estimated square footage has actually increased a little bit to about 44,000, just based on a little bit of growth on the first floor and then on the second and third floors, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So as far as the project budget, when we initially looked at this with the architects back in March 2021 to kind of look at their initial concept plan, again, we don't want to just look at growth and say, okay, what do we need for the next couple of years? We want to really look a little bit further out. What we don't want to happen is move into the surgery center in the summer of 2023 and find ourselves in a position of having to expand even further. And so we want to build something that will at least last us through the next 10 years. And so you can see the original project budget, including ACC renovations. And so the ambulatory surgery center is currently part of our ambulatory care center on Coley Drive. That will move out of the ambulatory care center into the building that we saw, and that will allow for expanded growth. We're kind of busting at the seams and running out of space at the ambulatory care center for modalities such as imaging, MRI, CT, as well as physical, occupational, speech therapy. Again, will allow for some growth and expansion of those service lines as well. So the proposed budget as of July is just under $44 million. And so I know one of the questions that's come up is, well, how are we going to fund this? Is this project really going to happen? And so we've been fairly successful in terms of fundraising, and that will not obviously pay for the entire project. And so the board has committed for the remainder of those funds to either utilize financing, whether it be through a bank, which we've gotten kind of a pre-approval letter, also looking at the possibility of bonds or even utilizing some of our savings to be able to pay for that project. So when we take away the parking spaces that are needed right now for the hospital itself, we need to find a space to be able to put additional parking spaces because we're taking away an entire parking lot and going to be placing a surgery center on that particular area. And so this is currently the 157 acres that was recently acquired by the hospital. That piece of property is currently in process for annexation. And so that was submitted, and I believe will go to planning and zoning early next month. But what we're looking at and really talking about today is the parking lot that we're needing to add in order to be able to accommodate this additional growth. And so the parking lot you can see is over there. The reason why we have this is that we're not talking about just a parking lot, but also looking at future growth and what does that look like. And so being able to provide that parking lot and also the infrastructure and utilities that are needed so that we can continue to grow in the future, that will allow us for accelerated future growth by putting utilities and whatnot to that area when we're doing the parking lot versus having to tear things up and worry about adding that later on. So potentially looking at adding some medical office buildings over the next several years and also the possibility of a wellness center. And so this is a little bit more detail of what those improvements would look like. And so the bottom part is the parking lot, and I have about 163 spaces. And then you can see a sidewalk that goes kind of up towards the top, towards the hospital, and that would be the access for employees. And then this drive connects, so Leonard Lane connects and would be accessible from either the hospital kind of perimeter circle or from Lehman Drive. Folks would be able to enter into that parking lot.
I mean, because I'm just looking at this.
Sure.
So connection between the new parking lot and the existing parking lot is a sidewalk?
So there's a sidewalk and a road. So you can see kind of that four-way intersection.
Yeah.
And so just to, I guess, north of that is a drive.
Okay.
Any other questions on this graphic? So as far as private improvements, so stuff that we, the hospital or Peterson Health would take on, so working with Wellborn Engineering to kind of really parse out what would be considered public improvements and what would be considered private improvements when we look at that previous graphic. So roughly $1.1 million is what Peterson would look at funding to be able to pave that parking, and you can see kind of the breakout there. And then the public improvements would total about 1.6 million. So roughly 2.8 or so for that entire project. So let's talk a little bit about the economic impact that Peterson Health has on the community. So when we look at our payroll, and again, a little bit different from what's in the application. The application says take your last full month of payroll and multiply that by 12 to get your annual payroll amount. As you may or may not know, in healthcare, we see trends up and down, cyclical, seasonal, and so the number here is for our entire fiscal year, which starts July 1st and ends end of June. And so for the fiscal year that just ended June 30 of 21, we had $97.4 million in wages and benefits. And we have over $100 million budgeted for this fiscal year that we're currently in that would end in end of June 22. This does not, actually some of this does include, so part of that is we have over 40 providers that are part of Peterson Health and Peterson Medical Associates that are included in that number. What it does not take into account is roughly the over 140 additional providers that have privileges at Peterson that also practice there that are not providers or employees of Peterson. So the new surgery center itself, we anticipate, and this is a fairly conservative estimate, that will aid us in recruiting about 13 proceduralists over the next 3 to 5 years. So what does that mean? When you look at Merritt Hawkins, and so that's a recruiting firm and some data that we pulled from there, Not going to read all of these, but you can see some of the economic impact that they believe each physician office has on a community. When we break it down and say, okay, we believe that roughly those 13 providers, that each of those providers would have roughly 5 additional employees within their office. So giving us about 65 total employees for that. And that's just primary. That does not include any sort of additional jobs, any sort of expansion at the hospital to be able to accommodate additional services that would be provided at the hospital based on those additional providers. Average wages and benefits of those jobs is about $60,000. And so when you look at the total impact, wages and benefits on the low side, again, conservative estimate is a little over $10 million. And when we look at the total consumer expenditures, slightly over $2.6 million. So when we look at the economic impact of Peterson Health, utilizing those same numbers, 1,200 employees, again, combined total consumer expenditures annually of about $48 million and supports an additional 2,168 jobs. So just to kind of wrap things up, so why are we seeking EIC support, and what does that mean, not just for Peterson, but for the community? Will help us, Peterson, spur significant job growth, helps us remain competitive. So when we look at it, our outpatient services tend to help make up some of the losses that we have maybe in our ER. We provide services to folks who come to our ER regardless of their ability to pay. And so when we look overall competitively, there is a freestanding surgery center in Bernie. There's a new one that's going to be constructed in Fredericksburg. In order for us to be able to remain competitive, we have to be able to recruit and retain proceduralists and surgeons here in Kerrville so that there's no desire for them to go elsewhere. Also, from a patient perspective, we need to be able to keep up and provide state-of-the-art facilities because that's what we believe the citizens of Kerrville deserve. Helps protect the 1,200 people that are currently employed. So don't want you to think of just the additional roughly 65 jobs that we're talking about with the 13 providers. We're really looking overall, helping us remain competitive will help also protect those 1,200 that are currently employed by Peterson. Sets the stage for us, Peterson and Kerrville, to really kind of be that regional hub. We talked earlier about folks coming in from Bandera, Comfort, Fredericksburg, and that's ultimately what we want to be, not just the hub for people of Kerrville, but for surrounding areas and communities as well. This is an identified key medical asset, which is in line with the Kerrville 2050 plan. And so it's in Kerrville's medical district, which was identified as a strategic catalyst area. And so I think that's pretty much it. What questions do you have for us?
Yeah, go back to the slide where the breakdown of the 1.6 million.
Keep going.
It was what, the private improvements slide?
Public improvements.
Public, okay.
That one.
There it is.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so y'all got a lot of land back there that y'all recently acquired. Do these public improvements anticipate just the development of those areas that are immediately around the parking lot, the 2 MOBs and the potential wellness center? Or do these improvements suffice to develop that entire area?
So I think it would all depend on what we ultimately develop there. And so we don't have exact plans right now, but know that what we would provide there would help spur some additional growth. I believe what we initially had planned there, but if we're talking about developing that entire 157 acres, there may be some need for some additional utility infrastructure type needs, but believe that that will definitely more than suit our needs for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
I think it is accurate to say that the infrastructure in that immediate vicinity is being sized in a way. It's not, for instance, I think they've intentionally designed it so they're not putting in 2-inch pipe that then needs to be ripped out and replaced with 4-inch pipe if they expand.
Yeah.
It's just they're not necessarily being expanded to areas that they're not sure if they're going to expand into. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that this was based on sizing that would anticipate the 2 MOBs and the wellness center, that if those were constructed, we're not having to go back through this again.
Yes, definitely. And I guess I was thinking you were thinking more further back. So there's some significant elevations where that would require additional booster pumps for water pressure and things like that based on how high the elevations are.
I assume our engineering department has looked at this and they're good with the sizing of everything.
On a very preliminary level.
Preliminary,
yes,
but I'm
yeah.
just
And I
saying.
mean, obviously, we're not at the point where we're reviewing construction documents, but
Sure.
there's been some due diligence just to kind of cross-reference there.
Good.
Joe, to your point about Peterson Health being a regional hub for medical, can you quantify in terms of hospital revenues, how much of a draw the hospital receives from outside Kerr County, both currently and upon completion of this new center?
So we have the ability to do that. I don't have numbers off of the top of my head right now, but we would have the ability to run that by the patient's address, physical address, and to be able to look, I believe, revenue stream by where they're coming from.
Generally, do you expect that percentage to increase with the new surgery center?
I believe it will. I mean, we've seen increase in Comfort. We've seen increase in Bandera, and believe we would see the same thing in Fredericksburg. You know, what percentage, it's hard to say.
As far as the remaining 157, that obviously you're not using at this point, I know it's not developed, and do you have general idea? Are y'all thinking in terms of residential areas back there? Is it more commercial development back there? What's your vision?
It could be any, right?
Any and all?
Yeah, it's again, I mean, we've got, you know, big dreams, but, you know, I'd hate to say, yeah, these are our dreams, because then people say, well, this is what you said that y'all were going to be doing with it.
Sure.
But it could be residential, you know, it could be a whole number of things from, you know, potential retail and different other healthcare related type entities.
Okay.
Go back to Greg's, sorry, I interrupt, Corey Edmondson, CEO, Peterson, but going back to Greg's statement, market share for us in the last couple of years from a primary service area, which is Kerr County, the way we rate that, and then what we call our corporate service area, which includes Comfort, Bandera, Fredericksburg. Our market share has increased significantly, both primary and in our secondary markets. So the road here is busier getting health care than it used to ever be. So that's a positive thing. We think the surgery center, absolutely, in recruiting specialists that we don't have today for the future, and growing the number of specialists will draw more of a, from the outside areas to our community. Our desire is to be one of those destination hospitals where we provide that kind of care and centers of excellence, and we've identified a few of those, which will be a big draw for the surrounding area.
I think the other thing that we have to at least take into consideration, and it's great presentation, by the way, but every time they bring in somebody from Bandera or wherever, their families come, they spend the night here, they eat their meals here. It's a huge, I would assume, huge multiplier effect from a sales tax standpoint.
So Joe and Corey, I would imagine that the construction of the parking lot and the ask for the public improvements is really contingent upon you guys moving forward with the new center, ambulatory center. Is that fair to say?
You say contingent.
I mean, you're not going to build this parking lot if you don't build the surgery center.
Correct. If we don't build the surgery center, there's no need to build the parking lot.
Okay, so how, can you speak to kind of where you guys are in the fundraising process? You alluded to it a little bit, Joe, but what's the gap or what's left to be done, and how much optimism do you have that you'll get there?
Yeah, so our goal was to raise $15 million for this particular project. We are confident and comfortable to even state that we've met that goal. We're hoping to shut that project down, or the fundraising still, there's money trickling in and around that. So we're feeling good about our fundraising effort. It's been a overwhelming community support for this project and for Peterson, which really gives us a lot of momentum.
And to the remainder of the balance of that, the board is committed to provide between $50 and $20 million for the project through what we've got in hand, or investments, or bonds, or some sort of mechanism. I wish Joe would have got down to the last part of his presentation, because he had paved the way for future development. And I think that's what we're asking AIC, is a little bit of help to get that infrastructure going, the roads and utilities, so we can pave the way to really expand that back there.
Thanks.
And just to clarify, because when I read the funding agreement or funding request, it did not have a specific amount. I'm assuming this is the specific amount you're requesting.
Yes. For the public improvements, 1.62 million, yes, sir.
What about time frame of the funding? What do you anticipate in terms of when you need the money?
So our intent is to be able to break ground in spring, May of '22, so roughly 6-7 months from now. And in order to be able to do that, our hope would be that we would have that parking lot pretty much ready to go before we start tearing up and interrupting parking on the main campus.
So to follow up on that, go ahead. To follow up on that question or comment, from an EIC standpoint, we always look at what our budget is and how our funds come in. Is this something you would need up front, or is it a potential that it could be spread over 2 of our fiscal years?
I mean, of course, we would love to have it up front, but completely understand if it's something that needs to be, spread out over a year or two. I don't think that would prevent us from being able to move forward on the project.
Something for us to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Joe. Great presentation.
Excellent
Thank
presentation.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we also have this in executive session, so I don't think there's any action we need to take on this. And I want to hold on item 6B, the lien holders agreement between EIC and Dakota Bank. Mike's going to give us an update on some of the changes that are proposed, and then we can consider possible action after our executive session. So we need to talk about potential rescheduling EIC meetings for December 20th and January 17th because of holidays. EA, do you have some proposals for us to consider in that regard?
Sure. So the December one, we just want to have a conversation with you. Obviously, City Hall will be open on that holiday week, but we know that Christmas is at the back half of that week. And so we just wanted to confirm with the group that we were going to have quorum and be able to attend on the 20th, or what the preference is there. In regards to the next agenda item, when we run into this every year, but the third Thursday of January is MLK, and City Hall will be closed on that one. So for December, we can absolutely have it on the 20th as long as you all can
Does
attend.
anybody have schedule conflicts with that date?
No.
Maybe, we haven't finalized our plans. Because I know in years past, have at times waived that meeting, I believe, the December meeting. Do you know of anything, I guess?
The only pending business you have is the application that you all reviewed today. So that really is the only, kind of time pressing matter. And then certainly the item 6A and 6B today, which are your regular consideration items.
I can be here if I have to.
And we can move it to the 13th as well. However you guys want to do it.
That doesn't make any difference to me, so.
Let's leave it on the schedule for the 20th, and we'll see if it turns out we don't have anything on that day, we can always cancel that and meet again in January.
Okay.
And as far as January 17th date, what did we do last year? Did we move it to a Tuesday or following Monday?
We actually moved it to the following Monday, I believe, the 24th. But we're available at however y'all want to do it, 10th, 18th, 24th.
I'm fine with moving it to the next Monday if nobody has any objection to that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, executive session, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss matters under section 551.071, 551.073, and 551.087.
I move.
Second.
Any objections? None? Okay, we'll move into executive session. We'll stay in here if that's okay.
That'll work.
All right, 6:16, and we're out of executive session. I will entertain a motion to instruct Mike to finalize the lien holders agreement between EIC and Dakota Bank concerning monetary grants and loans issued by the parties to Prairie Gold Real Estate LLC, DBA Kildare Mountain Manufacturing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, raise your right hand. That passes unanimously. And then I'll also entertain a motion to instruct staff to begin drafting a funding agreement for the request from Peterson Health for their application submitted on November 11th, 2021.
So moved.
And to set a public hearing.
And to set a public hearing for December 20th at 4 PM.
I so move.
Okay?
Second.
Motion second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. And that also carries unanimously. Any possible, or any items for future agendas or announcements? All right, we're adjourned, 6:17.